Totally Football Show. Today, Portugal are Nations League champions. Cristiano Ronaldo and Nuno Mendes are the Spain's reign enders. Now, will they be World Cup contenders? Plus, we talk England-Andorra a bit. Spurs cancelling Season 3 of Ange, Postecoglou what awaits, Italy's Spalletti Junction, and much more in this Totally Football Show. Monday the 9th of June. Hello, listener. Today's show features Jay Harris. Hey, Jay.
Hey, Jimbo. You all good?
Yeah, I'm very well. Lovely to see you. Great to see you in Hamburg, Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello back, James Richardson.
And a little bit of Adrian Clarke for us today as well. Quite a lot, I'm hoping. Hi, Adrian.
I'm here. Yeah, hello.
Excited to get your take on the Spurs madness, Adrian. And so much more. So much more. Among the topics, naturally, we'll be talking about will be Italy and their brilliant start to World Cup qualifying. James Horncastle will be along a little bit later on for some of that. Jay, even as we speak, you've got your brow furrowed, waiting for updates on the ongoing situation in North London. What's the latest?
This situation in North London has been ruling my life over this weekend. Obviously, Ange Postecoglou was sacked on Friday. It's a decision that I think a lot of people felt had been coming for a long time, but then there'd just been complete radio silence after that final game of the season. It was 2 weeks where no one really knew what was going on. Ange Postecoglou was on holiday in Greece. Tottenham's chairman, Daniel Levy, was on holiday as well. And the fan base was just sort of left in limbo. And then everything's ramped up since Friday evening. The statement came out at 5 p.m. that Postecoglou had been sacked. And Thomas Frank was the leading contender. And then myself and David Ornstein just reported for The Athletic in the last hour or two that Spurs have now made official direct contact with Brentford. But there's around a 10 million buyout / compensation fee that they need to pay to get him out of Brentford. But it looks like everything's sort of speeding ahead towards that conclusion. And Thomas Frank will become the next Spurs head coach.
Possibly by the time this drops to listeners, would you say, Jay?
No. I think we're safe enough to continue recording without being surprised midway through.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we'll talk about much more on that and what it means maybe for Spurs shortly. But shall we kick off with this? Portugal are two-time winners of the Nations League, beating highly rated Spain. Crikey. Wow. Who watched this? Who was thrilled at Portugal? Who's now clocking them up as maybe contenders for next year in North America?
They've got to be contenders, haven't they? When you look at the depth of the squad, the quality of the individuals, and the fact that they sort of, held into the game against a brilliant, talented Spanish side. They stuck at it, didn't they? And in the end, won on penalties. Look, they've got really good individuals. I think Nuno Mendes had a terrific tournament. I mean, he was absolutely brilliant. For PSG in the Champions League final, he kind of sacrificed himself by staying back and being more of a left side centre back. But we saw in the Nations League tournament how effective he is going forward. And yeah, I think the way he nullified Yamal and then scored that goal and then assisted for Ronaldo's equaliser was truly outstanding, really. So yeah, they've got to be contenders. Spain absolutely will be, but they do need to obviously improve on their defending, which was a little bit loose, I think, across those two games.
Well, it's 15 goals conceded in their last 6, so that's an ongoing issue for the Spanish. But Mendes, so much excitement about him and his opposite number at PSG, Hakimi, going forward. But as you say, shutting down Yamal in the big Yamal versus CR7 contest. Seb, you're nodding sagely.
Yeah, it's so... One of the most interesting trends in modern football is the power that comes from fullback. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day we're talking about Jeremy Frimpong and his defensive abilities, in relation to kind of his move to Liverpool. And it seems like defensive abilities and fullbacks now it's not really the conversation. It's the level of thrust and the way that they can change the attacking gears of a side. And you'd almost say, like, particularly with Hakimi, if you think about kind of a ranking of world fullbacks, I would say I would make him number one on the right-hand side. I'm not even sure who number two is. That's how clear he feels of the rest of the competition. I'm happy to hit entrants and contenders, maybe Trent Alexander-Arnold on a very, very good day. But to me, like, to have those two, that's almost the template for how you have attacking football now, is to have players who are exactly like those two. So it's such an amazing privilege.
Cristiano Ronaldo, we all had a chuckle at him in the Euros. But that's 8 goals now in his last 9 Nations League appearances. And he did Cristiano Ronaldo things in both the semi-final and this game here, Jay.
Yeah, it's the age-old debate with Ronaldo, isn't it? He sometimes just wanders through
The
games.
old age debate, actually. But yes.
he sometimes wanders through games so listlessly, but then when he pops up later on in games and scores, is that enough to sort of ignore what else he does? I actually thought it was quite interesting that when Nuno Mendes scores, he sort of just blows past Ronaldo, and Ronaldo doesn't really move into the box, which is what you'd want your striker to do. And then he almost looks a bit moody that Mendes didn't pass it to him. So he can still be strange at times, but he will always have that just magnetic ability to get a goal out of nowhere. The way he still attacks the back post and stuff like that, it's timeless. So it seems like he's still going to be there for the World Cup next year. I think this is his 3rd trophy with Portugal now. So fair play to him. Even when we doubt him, he still delivers. Of course, at some point, he will not be Portugal's number 9 anymore. He won't be their starting centre forward. Probably in 10 years' time, when players a lot younger than him have already retired. But we'll see. You can't really rule anything out with him these days.
Do you remember, like, in medieval times when an army was trying to was attacking?
I don't remember it personally, but
do you remember the anecdotes?
Yes,
do you remember
yes,
the anecdotes? And you'd kind of wheel a catapult into position and just fire stuff at the castle. That's Ronaldo now, right? He kind of, like, he can do a lot of damage, but you do have to wheel him into position and then just, and hope that there's a lack of mobility around him in response.
22 touches in the course of the final. That doesn't feel like a lot. I mean, one of them was a key touch.
Doesn't matter, does it? Doesn't matter when you can sort of, knock one into the back of the net on the volley as cleanly as he did, get in the right position at the right time. It doesn't matter.
Sorry, I'm going to indulge a horrible cliche, but it's one of those things that you don't just teach that. He has it as an instinct, and I suppose that's what allows him to keep playing.
Can you not teach that? I mean, it feels like whenever they talk about it in commentary, I think that's the one bit I could manage.
But could you? But hang on, James Richardson. Hang on. Let's crack back against this burst of ego. But could you do it in the split second that you would need to do it to be effective? You could talk about it, and we could all talk about it. Like I reckon, I could back myself to do that, but then in a way that evades a Premier League left back, probably not.
Probably not.
You also have to have to read the game extremely well, because you can make that movement, but if you're not aware of where the ball is going to land, then it's sort of irrelevant if you're just going back and forth. So it's that combination of intelligence to see how the player is progressing, and then the intelligence to kind of trick the defender with the double movement.
You can teach it. I've spent many a training session, where coaches are working with strikers on the movements they make inside the box. So it's something that coaches definitely work on, but the intuitive knack is what I think Seb's talking about, and that probably separates your real goal munchers from your average sort of 10 to 15 a season guys. They've just got this unspoken instincts.
If Seb had his time again, that is how he would articulate that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Ronaldo's munched his way to almost 1,000 goals now, and no doubt looking to add to that next year in the States, but he won't be going along to the Club World Cup this summer, possibly in deference to his advancing years. Just to point out that Yamal, who represents the other end of the age spectrum, and that clash was built up a lot ahead of this game, Yamal's father is younger than Ronaldo. Yamal is only 3 years older than Ronaldo's eldest son, so just crazy. Anyway, we rate Portugal then. Adrian's big on them. Seb and Jay, you agree, or is there still a little bit of, it's Roberto Martinez, I'm not sure?
Of course, as we sort of alluded to, there's always going to be an element of they'll there'll come a game at some point in the tournament where the smartest decision probably is to drop Ronaldo, and whether Martinez does that might prove to be either a big success or a big failure. But you just look at that Portugal team and who they brought off the bench. You got Gonçalo Ramos, Rafael Leao, Neves, Diogo Jota. That's like some serious strength and depth that other teams don't possess that quality. I'd say at the World Cup next year, there's probably maybe only 5 or 6 teams who will have a comparable amount of squad depth. So that's what you need in competitions, especially when there's going to be so many games in a short space of time. So yeah, they definitely should be contenders.
Yeah, Leao made a big difference. Also, shout out for Francisco Conceição, whose goal in the semi-final against Germany is goal of the tournament, probably. I say tournament, it was 2 games, but...
If I had an asterisk, Jimbo, though, I would say that, and I think we probably all agree on this, across the course of those fixtures, it showed a lot of exhaustive footballers playing pretty fractured football. Certainly that Germany-Portugal game, Conceição's goal was wonderful, of course. Nice move for Portugal's second, but it capitalised on bizarre German football, really, really poor individual mistakes. I think it was Alex Pavlovic who gave the ball away in his own third that led to the turnover. And that was a Germany that no Musiala, no Rudiger. It was pretty short. No Kai Havertz. It was a long way from being a first choice side, and Portugal kind of needed those mistakes to get through that game. So also, I don't think these end of season tournaments are context for anything, and they're not useful context for anything either. Even though that kind of that squad depth is mightily impressive heading into next year.
On Wednesday, it's going to be exactly 1 year till the World Cup begins in Mexico City. Big congratulations to Uzbekistan, Jordan, and South Korea, who qualified last week. It's the 12th time the Koreans have made it to the big show. First time for Uzbekistan and Jordan, so that's going to be exciting. Are Italy going to be there, though? Will the Azzurri make it to a World Cup after quite literally missing out on the last 2? Their qualifying hasn't started well. On Friday night, they went to Oslo and got beaten 3-0. James Horncastle joins us. James, classic get-up for Horncastle today. Lovely to see you.
Hello, James.
First of all, this 3-0 in Oslo on Friday. I mean, this is the best Norway ever, though, isn't it? This is a Norway team that's going to beat a lot of teams.
Yeah, probably the best since the 90s, when certainly the early 90s, when Italy played them at the World Cup in the US. Yeah, I mean, look, this game was always going to be tricky because of this generation of Norwegian players that they've got. It was made trickier by kind of preparations for Italy because they had a number of injuries. So, Moise Kean, who had the best season of his life, scored more than 20 goals in all competitions. He was ruled out through injury. You had a couple of the big centre-backs like Riccardo Calafiori, who, this time last year kind of really turned heads at the Euros with his performances. He was ruled out, as was Alessandro Buongiorno, who won the league title with Napoli. And then you had Spalletti being Spalletti, which is falling out with someone on the eve of the game. So basically, he told Francesco Acerbi, the Inter centre-back, that he wanted him to be in the squad. And then in his first press conference, accused Acerbi of ghosting him and saying that he had not responded. And so then Acerbi did respond by basically going on social media and saying, in no uncertain terms, that he didn't really get on with Spalletti, and it was nothing to do with the national team. Loves playing for Italy, but he wasn't going to play for the national team as long as Spalletti was in charge, which turns out wasn't for much longer.
Yeah, indeed not. Interesting that Roberto Mancini chose to like Acerbi's post.
Yeah, again, which having had this kind of introductory press conference to this round of qualifiers, where Spalletti immediately kind of went on the attack against Acerbi, you then had this sort of pre-match flash interview with Sky in Italy, where he'd noticed his predecessor Roberto Mancini had liked Acerbi's post, and then just sort of said, "Well, I hope that Mancini's phone has been hacked. I wouldn't want to believe that my predecessor would be doing this." So all of that. Look, yesterday when Spalletti did a press conference, even though he'd already been sacked, he did say, "Look, I have no problems with the players. I haven't lost the dressing room here," and got really kind of antsy, as is his kind of default, when a journalist kind of said, "Have you lost the dressing room?" And he said, "Come on then, names, surnames. Which players have I lost?" But the wisdom of taking on a player like a Cherby, when most of the kind of leadership group of that Italy team are Inter players, so teammates of a Cherby, you'd question the wisdom of doing that before such a big game.
So issues with his handling off the field. What about Italy's performance on it?
Well, they were 3-0 down at half-time, which, it's one thing to lose a game like this 3-0, but to be down and out so quickly was unacceptable. I would say, there've been so many extremes. You've kind of seen Spalletti, his Italy team kind of reflect the kind of his own kind of worst febrile kind of character, really, because there've been some moments where you could really get behind this Italy and believe in them. Like, for example, sort of last September when they beat France 3-1 in Paris. First time they won in France in 70 years. And, if you wanted to be optimistic, you could have said, that was the beginning of Spalletti's Italy, because let's not forget how he got the job. He got the job because Roberto Mancini kind of came up with an excuse to leave, and then a few days later signed with Saudi Arabia. And that was halfway through the qualifiers for the Euros. England were already far and away out in front and were going to top the group. And so there was a lot of kind of tension already for Spalletti, who, first international break that he took over, all the fans were saying, you need to drop Gigio Donnarumma. Second international get-together he had, police basically came into his training ground to talk to Sandro Tonali and Niccolò Fagioli about betting on football, and they were both banned. And then third international get-together was you have to play Ukraine. If you lose this game, you're not going to the Euros. So I have some sympathy for him not having a lot of time. And that's why I was kind of behind the decision not to sack him at the Euros last year after they lost to Switzerland. But it does now feel like this has definitely kind of run its course.
The feeling that he was never really a manager, though hugely gifted, suited to running a national team with the limited involvement with the players that involves, and the huge emphasis on personal relationships, not his strong point from what I'm hearing. A tense situation when he took over, not a great one for whoever comes in now. Italy currently lying fourth in the group, although admittedly they have several games in hand. They are fully 9 points, though, behind group leaders Norway. Who's it going to be who takes over the reins?
Well, at the moment it's between Claudio Ranieri and Stefano Pioli. Favorite is Claudio Ranieri. Ranieri had an incredible 7 or 8 months after coming out of retirement to bail out his old club Roma. Poor Claudio, no one will let him retire. He was supposed to be just like sort of looking after the grandkids, going on cruises with his wife. And then Roma were like, you're the only guy.
Well, before that, Cagliari was one last job, no? I'll do one last job at Cagliari.
Yeah.
Kept them up. Roma. Okay, I'll do one last job at Roma.
And so, and there was this kind of quite nice thing like last week where he did formally move upstairs at Roma, where he was like, I'm hiring Gianpiero Gasperini as my replacement. And, kind of showed Gasperini around the training ground. And certainly people within Roma felt that Ranieri would be a kind of really good influence on Gasperini, who, a little bit like Spalletti, has a very combustible character and is very fiery with the media. And now they're sort of negotiating with him to like, can you please stay on as an executive whilst you do this national team role? So that's it. But remember how discredited Ranieri was when he took a national team job the last time, which was, he was in charge of Greece. Didn't last long. I think they lost to the Faroe Islands.
Lost to the
And then
Faroe Islands. Faroe Islands not in this group, though, so there's that.
No. And then Gary Lineker kind of was like, this guy should never be near the Leicester job. I'm probably putting words in Gary Lineker's mouth there, but there was certainly some consternation that Ranieri got that Leicester job, and then obviously, the greatest story ever told in Premier League history was Leicester winning the title. So,
Indeed.
I feel bad, James, that he's taking this job because, this job has made fools out of very, very good managers recently. And, Claudio's age, having already retired, does he really need the inevitable hassle that will come with this job?
We shall see. It was kind of weird that Spalletti himself was the one who announced that he'd been fired. Isn't that normally what the Italian FA would have done?
Yeah, I think this just shows what a state the Italian Football Federation is in, because, a lot of people online are kind of saying, come on, Spalletti, he's completely inadequate for this job. We've seen all the worst sides of his character. Ultimately, the Italian Football Federation has been, the president of it has been in charge for when they last failed to get into the World Cup in 2022. They're up against it now. He did his own media appearance the morning of Sunday and kind of said, Spalletti, what an extraordinary guy, such a gentleman, a real noble soul. And then just wasn't there for Spalletti doing his own press conference where by then it had kind of already got out that Spalletti was leaving. And he was like, well, no, I'm not leaving. I've been sacked. Which was...
But he's still going to do Monday night's game.
Yeah, and I think an element of that is he didn't want to go out on a 3-0 defeat to Norway and sort of like, look, I'll be the grown-up here. I'll be very professional. It's too late in the day for the under-21 coach to step into the fray here. And I wouldn't mind going out on a win. So let's see.
Is Italy prepared to take on Moldova? Probably last night, as you hear this, listener. Lord knows what we would have added about that game with James, but it hasn't happened yet. We'll catch up soon, though, I hope, Mr. Horncastle. Sir?
Yeah.
Sir James?
Sir James. Yeah, I am off to Miami tomorrow. So
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Great stuff. That's for the Club World Cup. It's all kicking off this weekend. All right, Jay. So, as you mentioned, on Friday, Spurs showed Ange Postecoglou the door shortly after he'd finally brought them. 16 days, was it? After he brought the Europa League glory?
Yep. 16 days.
He was, I was excited to read in your piece on theathletic.com, the second longest Spurs manager since Harry Redknapp left in 2012. Good Lord.
Yeah, so they all seem to last a similar amount of time. I think Mourinho and Conte pretty much nearly hit the exact same number of around 60 games. So normally by about 19, 20 months into their time in charge of Spurs, Daniel Levy gets itchy feet and decides he wants to get rid of them. The difference on this occasion was that Spurs had this Europa League carrot dangling in front of them. And I think... obviously, Mourinho got sacked a couple of days before the Carabao Cup final. And I just think Spurs also knew that they couldn't really finish a third season in a few years with another caretaker manager. It's just an awful look. And they decided to go all in on Postecoglou. And Postecoglou changed his way of playing in the Europa League. They became a bit more, it's a bit of a dirty word for Postecoglou, but pragmatic, it's true. They were really defensively disciplined against Eintracht Frankfurt. Me and Seb were both there at that game. We thought Spurs were going to lose. Produced a really disciplined 1-0 performance. Bodo Glimt, they should have beaten comfortably considering the greater resources they have, and they did. And then they beat Manchester United in the final. And I think the outpouring of emotion from players, fans, everybody after that game did make you sit up and think maybe Postecoglou will go into a third season. If any manager deserves to be given a second chance, maybe it's him. Then Postecoglou almost added to his own mythology by making that joke about the third season is always better than the second, only to then realise that often main characters are killed in the third season of popular television shows. But what I thought would happen is that Spurs would mull over the decision for a week and then sack him. I didn't expect it would take 2 weeks. I think it's been a bit of a damaging period because, Spurs are looking at their rivals like Manchester United signing Matheus Cunha, going after Bryan Mbeumo, Chelsea signing Liam Delap, Liverpool getting Frimpong and going after Wirtz, and Spurs have just been in stasis basically. They're letting all of their rivals who already finished, apart from Manchester United, comfortably ahead of them, get even more ground. But it looks like finally things are heading in the right direction. Thomas Frank, we expect, is going to be appointed now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. And it's going to be interesting to see what his version of Spurs looks like and if he's backed in the transfer market and who he wants to keep in that squad and who he wants to sell in that squad. It seems to be that every 2 years Spurs do this and they embark on another rebuild. They embark on a new project manager. Will it work this time? Who knows?
Will it work this time, Adrian?
Well, should we get on to the man that has been obviously heavily linked? I suppose we should really in terms of Thomas Frank. Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I do think that Postecoglou had to go. They finished 17th. It's dreadful, and they won a trophy playing a brand of football that he really found pretty grotesque. He couldn't have carried on with that style of football. He had to surely have reverted back to Ange Postecoglou, which took them to 17th. So he had to go. Thomas Frank, I think, has definitely earned his chance. He sort of pound for pound an excellent manager. I think that in terms of performance relative to wages, he's top of the league every single year, Thomas Frank. So that is to be admired. He's shown himself to be a really versatile coach as well. I watched his Brentford side in the Championship a lot, and they were excellent to watch. They were a high possession team, attack-minded side. It was, good football. And then he adapted in the Premier League, realised I don't have the budget to compete playing that style of football in the Premier League, so I'll go to something different. So I don't think we should judge him on the sort of direct style that he's implemented in West London. So I think he ticks a lot of boxes. It's just there are two question marks. Can he handle the sort of bigger earner players, because he's a sort of quite a holistic guy. I think he's quite a charismatic, nice person. In these bigger dressing rooms, you get less nice people sometimes. So how will he handle that? And also, he's a very methodical tactician, in my opinion. Someone that has really thrived on having a whole week to prepare against teams that have had European football, and he's got a very good record in those big games. He's obviously then he's gonna have quick turnarounds, 2-3 days to get those game plans right, and that's something he's just not used to. So there's a couple of question marks, but he definitely deserves a shot at a bigger club, and in the Champions League, it's really exciting. And look, the only way is up, surely. Spurs can't finish 17th again, can they? So I think it's a good time to take over Tottenham.
Okay, cut and clip that, producer Charlie. Date marked June the 9th, 2025. Seb, you've seen a lot of Spurs in your time. Thumbs up or thumbs down on this? The decision to sack Ange, the decision, if so it proves, to go with Thomas Frank.
I got some thumbs up with conditions. The only thing I've got to add to what Jay and Aid said is that I do hope that Spurs know what they're appointing, or at least understand why it's worked so well at Brentford. Because I think when you talk about Brentford, you think of probably one of the smartest football clubs in Europe in terms of its ability to use its resources well. I don't think you say the same thing about Tottenham. And so, the evaluation is not just, is Thomas Frank a good coach? Is he an adaptable coach? Does he work well with players? And can he make the most of what resources he has? Clearly, the answer to all of those questions is yes. It's, can Spurs replicate that at a higher scale? That's the question I have. And so if they are, then absolutely a thumbs up. But if they're not, it's just, Jay and I were on another podcast saying the exact same thing earlier. It's just another Juan de Ramos if they can't. So let's see.
What's the big difference at Spurs then to Brentford in terms of how that's going to impact on Thomas Frank's work?
I would say executive alignment. Say everybody pulling in the same direction, everybody understanding what their role is within the system. Also, appointments making sense in terms of who is in control of other departments. So, for instance, at Spurs, sporting director Johan Lang, sure, a very data-led person. We've seen that with some of his signings before. Very low noise person as well. Doesn't celebrate his own job performance in the way that other people in that job can. But then, of course, on top of him, having seen Scott Munn leave the club earlier this summer, last week even, Fabio Paratici is supposedly coming back. Paratici is not a data guy. Paratici is a relationships, connections, deals guy. So how do you reconcile that coach with that sort of ideological direction? Maybe it works perfectly, but that would be a concern that I have.
Broadly, though, this does sound like good news for Spurs after what Michael Cox described as the worst managerial performance of all time in the Premier League, finishing 17th by a manager who'd been in charge for a full season. To bring in one of the brightest prospects, certainly in this league.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on something Seb said about like executive alignment. Thomas Frank's been at Brentford for 9 years nearly, 2 as an assistant coach to Dean Smith, and then nearly 7 as head coach. So he's had the same people working above him for pretty much all of that time. Phil Giles, the director of football, Matthew Benham, the owner, and they all get on extremely well. And I did a piece to celebrate Phil Giles' 10th anniversary at Brentford last month. And a lot of people spoke about how he's very good at separating his feelings or the emotional aspect of football from what the stats and what the facts are telling you. And the perfect example of that is, I think it was in 2015, Brentford hired someone called Marinus Dijkhuizen and it went terribly wrong. Hired him in June and he was sacked by September because what they were seeing on the training ground and the underlying numbers was awful. Thomas Frank loses 8 of his first 10 games as Brentford head coach. Many other clubs would have pulled the plug, but they saw that the underlying data was good. They knew that the squad had a really good relationship with Thomas Frank and they kept him. If Thomas Frank loses 8 of his first 10 games at Spurs, he won't last long. He also didn't win any of his first 8 games when he was in charge of Brøndby. So he doesn't always get off to the best possible start. And because of the sort of difficult emotions involved in sacking Postecoglou, he really needs a quick start to get the Spurs fan base on side as quickly as possible. So it's a very tricky situation that he's going to have to navigate. And then what Adrian said about the step up in the Champions League, playing twice a week. I think Brentford played maybe 42 games last season and Spurs were on 60. So it's a massive step up in terms of demands. And people will hear all the time now one of Thomas Frank's favourite phrases, which is the 24-hour rule. So whether Brentford win or lose, they have 24 hours to process their emotions and their feelings after a game. And I just think, I don't know if you can do that. If you're playing on a Sunday against Liverpool, for example, at 4:30, and you've got an away game in the Champions League on Wednesday, as much as I love that idea, I just don't think it will work in principle. And sorry to keep rambling on, but I think one of the really good things Frank did at Brentford was he sort of weaponized this idea that they were an underdog. You know, he spoke about they had a no dickheads policy. He always told the squad to be confident but humble. And I think that was reflected in the players that they were signing. They were signing players who were undervalued by other teams or not wanted by other teams. And they were sort of all growing organically on this magical journey. It's very different at Spurs. You're going to go.
Are you saying there are dickheads at Spurs?
No, I'm not saying. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a completely different pressure at Spurs. If they lose 5 of his first 10 games, he can't really turn around and say, "Oh, you know, this is a bit of a journey." People are going to want to see progress immediately and expect that. And how he deals with that will be very intriguing.
I think one of my hopes is that the club have all the intelligence to recognise what Jay has just said, and that the situation he's inheriting is quite difficult. Emotionally, a lot of people are going to be with Postecoglou and are going to hold on to that for a while. And so that means that he's got to be given enough time to prepare his team for the new season. You can't have a situation where the club are trying to do decisive business in the last, in August. You've got to recognise that he's someone that needs preparation time. He's someone that's going to need a lot of players to be able to kind of produce his best, to replicate the kind of the time on the training ground that he had at Brentford when you're still on a Champions League schedule. and you've got to give him a chance to kind of compete with that Ange hangover, for want of a better expression. You've got to be fair to him, because at the moment, Tottenham are in a kind of situation where it's almost like when Chelsea managers used to fail. It didn't really reflect on them. You can have that argument about Postecoglou if you like, but there's certainly mitigation for some of the things that happen in terms of the way that squad was equipped last year. Not saying that he's not complicit in the injuries and all that kind of stuff, but clearly one of the kind of the threads that binds all of these Tottenham coaches and their success and failure is, were they supported in the right way? And the answer has been no on quite a few occasions. So that has to be rectified too. And it's not just about changing a coach and think it's all going to go better, because it won't be like that.
So, Jay, Bryan Mbeumo wants to leave Brentford and go to Man United, but Man United so far haven't got enough money to make that happen. Is this situation impacted by the fact that Bruno Fernandes hasn't gone to Saudi Arabia? So has that limited United's means?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they've liked Mbeumo for a long time anyways. Firstly, this is sort of bad timing for Brentford, really, isn't it? At the start they've had a mental 2 weeks at the start of this window when you think about it. Their first choice goalkeeper, Mark Flecken's already moved to Bayer Leverkusen, and they've signed Kevin Kelleher from Liverpool. Their best player last season, and someone who's been, an incredible player for the last 6 years, and Bryan Mbeumo wants to leave, and is probably going to go to Manchester United, and their head coach is being poached. So it's probably, I'm glad I'm not their director of football at this point in time, because it's probably a bit relentless. I think Brentford are well within their rights to hold out for as much money as possible with Mbeumo. He's got a year left on his contract, but there's a 12-month option. So he's basically got 2 years left. They've got control over that. He's just scored 20 goals in the Premier League. The season before, I think he got 11 goals in the league, but he was out injured with ankle ligament damage for 3 months. But otherwise, his trajectory was he was going to finish the season really strongly then as well. So you got an incredible performer, goal scorer, who can play in multiple positions. He can play centrally. He can play on the right wing. I've even seen him as a right wing back, which does make me slightly worried. Man United will turn him into an auxiliary right wing back. So I think Brentford are, they have to demand a club record sale.
Is there any way that a Thomas Frank-led Spurs could maybe step in?
I'm not totally convinced by that. I also think, to give you all a little bit of background, Thomas Frank will inherit Brennan Johnson at Spurs, and Thomas Frank really likes Brennan Johnson, tried to sign him at Brentford on quite a few occasions. And I do wonder if he'll quite enjoy working with Brennan Johnson as on the right wing. And I think bringing in Mbeumo would just sort of muddy the waters a little bit, and it'd be a little bit confusing. Look, I'm sure he wouldn't turn it down, but he also knows that he's getting someone in Brennan Johnson that he likes and he values anyways.
Is he a good fit for Manchester United system? Because we know that's not changing. You see, I like Cunha as a fit, because all of his best work. I mean, I've heard Man U fans saying Cunha's going to play up front. For me, no. He does all of his best work as a left 10. If you look at everything he did for Wolves, is when he played in a left number 10 position. He's a perfect fit there for me. I don't like his attitude. I think they might have made a mistake on that, but stylistically, he's a great fit. And Mbeumo, I don't know, because that right side, number 10, that's not really him. He likes to fly down, from wider areas, or, drive in from wider. And that's not really where Amorim uses that player. For me, Ahmed Diallo is the perfect guy to play as the right side number 10, not Bryan Mbeumo. If they're looking at him as the striker, then that's a risk, because he hasn't really played that many games as a lone striker. It's often as a 2 with Johan Wissa. So I don't see it as a natural fit. I really don't. I think there are other clubs out there that would be miles better for Bryan Mbeumo, but it's up to him. He's obviously been seduced.
Maybe so. Adrian, what do you make of the other moves going on? For example, Chelsea, who have now confirmed Liam Delap joining them as their new number 9.
I really like Liam Delap, and he kind of suits Chelsea's model, or the model that they've had when they've had successful teams of having a sort of strong number 9. But I don't, in the here and now, I don't think Nicholas Jackson is as bad as some people kind of paint him out to be. Like, I think he can he might start as number 2 behind Nicholas Jackson. I think that's up for debate, basically, because he's a good player, Liam Delap. He carries the ball beautifully. He can finish. He can score different types of goals. But it's a heck of a step up, isn't it, to be Chelsea's first choice centre forward? And for me, Nicholas Jackson really stretched opponents fantastically. And yeah, his finishing is really erratic. But Jackson's link-up play with Palmer is actually pretty good. So I think that those two will just have competition, and that's really good for Chelsea. I think what's really interesting is that Maresca's basically hoovering up all the players he worked with at Manchester City. Because he worked with Palmer at Manchester City. Lavia.
Yeah, Palmer and Delap played in the same
was
team,
there, wasn't he?
they?
Yeah. And then there's talk
Gittins
of Jamie Gittins coming in, the guy from Dortmund. So, this...
I think is that agreed now?
Yeah, there's an agreement between the player and Chelsea, but there's no agreement between Chelsea and Dortmund as of yet. Right. I think that happens. But there's still a little bit of a way to go. Hope that maybe he joins Chelsea for the Club World Cup, but we'll see. Still a bit of agreeing to do.
Isn't it quite funny how that 15 years ago was considered tapping up, and now it's just par for the course? Like, everybody does it. Like, we don't even consider it tapping up anymore. But back in the day, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of a way of reducing time wasting. If you're not going to be able to make an agreement with the player, don't even bother. And I think it's a way of moving through the market a little bit more efficiently, so that you can, so you know what's available, so you know what's realistic, so you can just go and do it. But I think he's a wonderful player. Like, I know Jamie Gittins had a bit of a tough time in the second half of the season in the Bundesliga, but he was asked to be a first team regular for the first time in his career. Suffered a little bit with the kind of the physical requirement of having to play Bundesliga, Champions League, and be kind of the focus of Dortmund's attack, and the focus of an attack within a team that wasn't particularly stable under Nuri Sahin. And then when Nikola Kovac comes in February, he's not really in the best place physically. His confidence has been dented, and also Kovac prefers a sort of slightly more centre-based running player in Adeyemi, and wanted a player who was a kind of a slightly different stage of his development because the situation was so dire at the club. He was kind of a bit of a man at a time, but none of that should distract from just how talented he is. Just such a direct attacking player.
Is he a better player than Noni Madueke said? Because I got to be honest, I'm not a Madueke fan. I like him Madueke a little bit, but yeah, he did. I mean, I think there's more to Jamie Gittins' game. I think you can beat a defender off the left and right foot. I think the release of his shots is quicker. I think there's a great amount of power that you can generate and shoot in small space in the penalty box. I think as a kind of a left to right touchline to penalty box player, he's incredibly dangerous when he's confident. Only caveat: he needs the right player behind him. Because he's not a defensive player yet. He hasn't built that side of his game, so he needs to be supported in a way that he probably wasn't at Dortmund last season. So, there's potential to tap, but he's very, very exciting, very talented.
Chelsea also look like they're bringing in Mike Maignan, according to sources in Italy, who's a terrific goalkeeper, and quite possibly an upgrade on their current situation between
Not
the
quite
posts.
possibly.
Also heading out.
Definitely an upgrade. Yeah.
Also heading out of San Siro, Tijani Reindeers, who's going to Man City, who've been pretty busy. Ryan Aït-Nouri heading in from Wolves. Ryan Cherky, perhaps most excitingly. We didn't really talk about what he did for France in that extraordinary semi-final with Spain of the Nations League, when Spain were, 4-0 up when he came on? 4-1?
Magical player.
And extraordinary performance when he sort of strolled on. Thought, they're having a kick around. I'll join in. 3 goals later. Not all of them scored by him, but he certainly played a part. Anyway, I guess the worry with this is, given how Pep / Man City have affected this kind of freewheeling talent in the past, what do you make? This is a question actually Andrew Turner asks. How will Pep handle a team full of soloists after his Grealish experience? Cherky, Doku, Marmoush, Savinho, Reinders and Haaland, all very fun, but offer nothing without the ball.
Don't agree with that.
No, it's a bit harsh.
I think certainly on Marmoush, I think that's very, very harsh on Marmoush. I think he is a fun player, but he's become a very hard-working, talented player in both directions.
What about the Pep impact on their playing style?
Yeah, there's a habit of kind of sawing off all the kind of the fun, frilly bits. But I don't necessarily think that kind of Grealish should be the model for what happens with Ryan Shirky. I think there are other factors there. I think there's a little bit of a personality issue, clearly. And I don't know. I think it can go the other way too. I think you can kind of distill all of that essence into a really, really fun, attractive player. I mean, look at what he did with Bernardo Silva. David Silva played some wonderful football under Guardiola too before he left. So could go one with the other. I mean, there is a slight cultural jarring to it because you kind of want to see Shirky play in like a very, very flawed team where he's the sort of the Riquelme-like genius in the middle of it who just walks around the pitch and does whatever he wants with the ball. But no, he's going to Manchester City for a reason, I'm sure.
Oh, he's a brilliant player to watch. What I love about him, James, is he plays with personality. Like he plays with real. He's an individual, isn't he? He would just be free and do what he wants to do when the ball is with him.
Will he though?
Well, this is the issue I have with anyone that Pep signs that's an attacker because he's such. So intense in terms of what he requires from the players positionally. He fills them with so much information. Now, some players can handle that and still be free and go and do their thing. I'd say that Doku and Marmoush are two good examples of that. But there are certain players that it overloads them and they suddenly feel that they can't play with the same freedom as before. So that's the only sort of question mark I'd have over it. I mean, talent-wise, he's definitely good enough, Cherky, to thrive for City. Is he robust enough for the Premier League? Probably, but that some people would have it down as a minor question mark as well. But it's a really exciting signing, an absolute bargain fee, by the way. I know that Lyon is sort of having to offload, but City are getting a very clear run at a player of immense talent for very little money. I think this could be an amazing signing.
It's one of those anomalies, isn't it? Because it was almost to the point where he was available for so little money that you thought something must be wrong with him. Because I remember Dortmund tried to sign him in January, and that went right to the end of the window. Dortmund were quite confident. John Textor went on French TV and said, "Hey, he's not going to Dortmund." And it was kind of, I think Dortmund had assumed there was some kind of, not necessarily release clause, but some kind of mechanism in that contract that Textor said no. I'm not sure of the ins and outs of that situation, but it seemed like something has happened in the space of a couple of months where people have either been convinced or, the trajectory of his career has completely changed. Interesting.
Sounds a very exciting prospect for Liverpool fans. Man City, we hear, beefing up their line-up ahead of the next run at the title. Other teams going to be facing a bit of competition. Hey, Adrian. Anyway, we'll move on. 10th of June, quite possibly as you hear this, listener. On this day, in which case, in 1984, what happened, Adrian?
Oh, John Barnes.
Brazil 2-0.
Yeah, he scored a
John
phenomenal
Barnes.
solo goal at the Maracanã. I think over 100,000.
Do you remember watching that?
Well, I think I woke up the next morning. I don't think I watched it at the time. I was quite young at the time. But I do remember it being played over and over and over again on TV. And it was, as a winger, and I was a winger back in the day, it was like, whoa, okay. An English winger can score this kind of goal against the mighty Brazil in Brazil. That's what made it so special. And when you look at it, I would advise anyone young enough not to know what we're talking about here to look on YouTube. Look at the pitch. Look at the pitch. The grass is long. It's proper bobbly. And he just glides past 3, 4, 5 players, including the goalkeeper, and just knocks it into the goal. It's a thing of beauty. So yeah, one of England national team's greatest ever goals, no doubt about that.
Yeah. Mark Haitley scored the other in this game, but no one ever talks about that one. Moving on the 10th of June, 1997. Do you know what happened, Jay?
Tournoi?
Yes. It was the last time that England won a trophy, Le Tournoi, ahead of the 1998 World Cup in France. This dress rehearsal a year before featured England and Brazil and France. Who was the other team? Italy. Of course, Roberto Carlos scored that free kick. And England lifted the trophy. It was a magnificent trophy as well. It was a kind of black and white ball on a bit of wood.
July
the 19th,
wasn't it, or something like that? Yeah.
I suppose. Yeah, very much
and
so.
by the way, we didn't talk about it earlier, but look at what it meant to the players to win the Nations League. Like, it took me back a little bit. I was like, whoa, that these guys, this means something huge to them. And I think maybe we, as English people, maybe need to start embracing, this competition and seeing it as a little bit more important, because to the rest of Europe, it seems to matter massively. You're representing your country.
I feel if England had made the last four, had made the semi-finals, it would have suddenly become very, very important. July the 19th, 2026. Could England be lifting something pretty special that day? What do you think? We've seen a third match. This was last week, Saturday, was it not? A third match under Thomas Tuchel. Andorra, with the opponents, 1-0 the scoreline. You'll have seen this perhaps, listener, if you had nothing better to do. Some pretty damning appraisals of England's performance, not least from manager Thomas Tuchel himself. But next up on Tuesday, there's a friendly with Senegal at the City Ground in Nottingham. Adrian, what was your take?
I'm going to the game against Senegal, so I'm looking forward to that.
Are you?
I don't think. I think
Senegal
it's one of those,
are exciting. They've got your Nicholas Jackson in there.
It will be a better game. It will be a better game because I think they'll bring a little bit of flair. They'll go for it. They'll try to score goals, and that will probably help England. I don't think we should take too much from the Andorra game. It's not going to be like anything England experienced at the World Cup. But yeah, it was pretty miserable. It was slow and non-inventive. I think what we've seen under Tuchel, that from a tactical point of view, that is interesting, is the inverted fullbacks. Okay, so he seems really keen on that. He did it with Miles Lewis-Skelly, didn't he? In the first two games, it worked brilliantly. Here, I had no problem with him trying it with Curtis Jones, who obviously played a big part in the goal. So he's looked at him in that position. He knows that Trent Alexander-Arnold can do that in that position. And I don't have an issue with the inverted fullback, but what I think England do lack is someone to fly down the sides and have that real pace and dynamism down the sides. We talked about Nuno Mendes earlier, Hakimi, guys like this. They are the kind of players that can stretch and make things happen in tight matches. And I do think that maybe this England squad lacks that at the moment. So, yeah, that's where I think a Gordon or a Rodgers have probably quite an important part to play under Tuchel, because we are going to need pacey players, because we haven't got one at striker. So you're going to have to find, somewhere else in the team to burst past people, for want of a better expression. So, yeah, that's what I think England need to work on between now and the World Cup. There's a lot to work on, but that's one aspect for sure.
I think that's one of the interesting aspects of Gittins' potential move to Chelsea, because the absence of that kind of one-on-one player that just is raw ambition, like technical ability, speed, that's kind of what he represents. And there's a way to go. Clearly there's some development, there's some sort of reputation bolstering that needs to happen. But you could see a year further down the track him potentially being that kind of player in the England setup. I think I could see it.
Jay, what would you like to see happen to England after the Andorra game?
Well, I was going to say, is Madueke not speedy and with dynamism? But Adrian, I think I've realised you're not the biggest fan of him, are you?
Well, it's just because I don't think I think he's a little bit greedy, and
that's
like
fair.
I don't know about his end product really, and I certainly don't think he works hard enough when he doesn't have the ball. Like, it's just a personal thing. I just don't really rate him that highly, but I think there are other. I would prefer Gordon in that position, even though he played fine in that game. Madueke, I prefer Gordon, or even a Rodgers. Obviously, you've got Saka on the right, who will add a bit of that 1v1 quality, but on the left, it's definitely up for grabs.
I kind of prefer Madueke off the right too. I feel like he's a bit better.
That's where he plays for Chelsea.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say, I feel like it always happens every qualification campaign. There'll be some result where England don't play particularly well. They get hammered by everybody, and we have to turn it into a big deal, because otherwise there's no jeopardy whatsoever in England qualifying campaigns. And I also think, you look at that lineup. I didn't watch the game. I've seen the highlights, but a lot of those players have never played with each other before in that type of system. So it's always going to take a little bit of time. Still, I'm quite excited by the attacking talent at Tuchel's disposal. It just needs to work out what the best lineup for them is, and that's sort of the point of this qualifying campaign. If this was happening a month before the World Cup, I'd be a bit more worried, but it's a year away. So
we should stop televising post-season international friendlies. No, really, because it would save us all so much trouble. Like you print the result on the paper, digitally if you want to, and then you just move on. It's done. They won in Andorra. Nobody has to have any conclusions. They don't need to have any opinions about it. It's just done. On we go.
I think it's an opinion that would be really popular in Italy as well.
Yeah.
Okay. State of affairs. All right then. Well, on that note, let's park the England chat. They'll be playing Senegal Tuesday night. Thursday, we'll be back with another pod, and we can have a discussion on what comes out of that match and the latest transfer stories and what's happened with Thomas Frank and all the other things we've been touching on, and loads of new things as well, including, this is exciting, on Thursday we're going to be having the draw for this year's Intertotally Cup. Woof. Woof. So, plenty to look forward to then. Do hope you'll join us for that, listener. For today, it's many thanks to James Horncastle, to Seb Stafford-Bloor, Jay Harris, Adrian, Clarke, and producer Charlie, and also video producer Liam. Remember, our show is very much a visual feast as well over on our YouTube channel. And thanks to you, listener. Be back with you on Thursday. I hope you join us then. For now, from all of us here, it's goodbye. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.